The wind that night had a voice of its own, low, distant, almost whispering through the pine. Snow gathered thick on the window ledges of a forgotten cabin deep in Vermont's Green Mountains. Inside, a single bulb swung gently from the ceiling, its light flickering in rhythm with the storm. Floyd Myers hadn't slept in 3 nights. He sat hunched near the fire, coat still on, shotgun across his lap. The kettle on the stove hissed softly, long since boiled dry. He kept staring at the front door. Not because someone was knocking, but because it had knocked back earlier, and he hadn't imagined it. Out here, there were no neighbors for miles, no roads, no reason for footsteps crunching outside after midnight. When the sound came again, 3 slow knocks, too even to be wind, Floyd didn't move. He only whispered to himself, "Go away." Silence. Then the voice came. Not from outside, but from right behind the door. It spoke his name, perfectly clear. Only it wasn't his voice that answered. Days later, when the sheriff's team broke through that same door, the fire had burned out. The chair was empty, and nailed just above the mantel, lit by a streak of dying sunlight through the window, was a human face. One that looked exactly like Floyd's. This is the case of Floyd Roger Myers, Jr., the man who vanished inside his own cabin, and the thing that wore his face. Vermont's Green Mountains hide 1,000 stories. Hunters gone missing, cabins left half-burned, voices heard across frozen lakes. Most of them fade with time, buried beneath snow and silence. But this one never found its ending. In the winter of 1991, a man named Floyd Roger Myers, Jr. disappeared inside his own cabin, just a few miles outside Rutland County. The official record lists it simply as unresolved. No suspect, no motive, no sign of forced entry. And yet for decades, locals in the area have whispered about what was found there. The strange markings on the walls, the skin-like texture nailed near the hearth, and the voice recordings pulled from a half-melted cassette player. It wasn't a murder that haunted the officers who found that cabin. It was what they said they heard before they even stepped inside. A man's voice, faint but distinct, calling out from within. The problem was, the voice belonged to the man who was already gone. This is Vermont's Forgotten Cabin case, the story of Floyd Roger Myers, Jr., and the thing that wore his face. Before he became a name on a case file, Floyd Roger Myers, Jr. was just another quiet man living too far from town for anyone to notice when he went missing. He was 56, a retired carpenter from Rutland, widowed for nearly 8 years, the kind of man who still left a plate out for his wife at breakfast. Old habit, never broke it. After her passing, he bought a small patch of land near the base of Killington Peak, about 3 miles off an old logging trail. Locals said he built that cabin himself, every nail and board, from the remains of an abandoned ranger outpost. He wasn't antisocial, just private. Came into town once a week for supplies, coffee, and his usual pack of Pall Malls. The cashier at the general store remembered him as polite, soft-spoken, the kind who'd apologize if you bumped into him. But in the months leading up to winter, people started noticing changes. He stopped showing up at the diner, he stopped picking up his mail, and when a friend from town, a man named Richard Avery, went out to check on him, Floyd met him at the door but wouldn't open it. He said something strange, that the woods weren't quiet anymore, that at night he heard himself walking outside. Avery thought he was joking, maybe losing his grip after too many winters alone. But when he looked closer, he saw something off. Floyd had nailed a mirror to the inside of his front door. When Avery asked why, Floyd just said, "If it knocks again, I want to see what it looks like this time." No one saw him alive after that night. 3 days passed before anyone went looking for Floyd. The snowstorm that week had shut down most of Rutland's back roads, and the only reason anyone noticed he was missing was because his truck was still parked outside the general store, keys still in the ignition. On January 18th, Deputy Harold Lawson and 2 search volunteers followed the old logging trail to Floyd's cabin. It was near dusk when they found it. The front steps were buried halfway under snow, but there were no footprints leading up, only out, circling the cabin twice before vanishing into the tree line. Lawson said later the air felt wrong, like it hadn't moved in days. The windows were iced over from the inside, and the door was still latched shut. When they finally forced it open, the smell hit first. Stale smoke, kerosene, and something metallic beneath it. Inside, everything was in perfect order. The bed neatly made, a half-filled mug on the table, frozen solid. The radio by the window was on, faint static whispering through the speaker. And then came the details that didn't make sense. The walls were covered in mirrors, at least a dozen, all mismatched, some cracked, nailed up at uneven heights. In the center of the room sat Floyd's chair, facing the door. The shotgun rested against it, untouched, safety still on. Above the fireplace, something hung where a hunting trophy might have been. The deputies thought it was leather at first. Then the light caught it just right, and they realized it was skin, pale, stretched flat, and shaped unmistakably like a human face. The eyes were open. Lawson's report said he dropped his flashlight and stumbled back into the table, but when he looked up again, the radio had changed. The static was gone, and a voice, calm, low, and deliberate, came through the speaker. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice was Floyd's, but the tape recorder on the shelf, the one plugged into the radio, had been running for 3 days straight. When they played it back, the last sound captured was a knock on the door, followed by a second voice, one that sounded exactly like the first. That was the last official entry ever filed under the Myers investigation. No fingerprints, no body, no suspect. Just the mirrors, the radio, and what they later called the thing that wore his face. In the days that followed, the Myers cabin was sealed off, cataloged, and photographed, though those photos have never been released publicly. The official report lists the incident under unresolved, suspicious death. But without a body, the coroner couldn't even confirm that a death had occurred. The face found above the fireplace was sent to the Vermont State Lab in Waterbury. Results came back inconclusive. The tissue was human, yes, but the DNA matched no one on record. Not Floyd, not any local missing person. Investigators combed the property for weeks. No footprints leading in, no blood trail, no signs of a struggle. Even the mirrors, about a dozen of them, had no fingerprints except Floyd's. What puzzled everyone was the audio. The cassette recovered from the radio was 6 hours long, most of it dead air. But at timestamp 3:47 a.m., there's a sound, faint, deliberate. 3 knocks. Then a man's voice, breathless, muttering. It's at the door again. It keeps saying my name. A pause. Then another voice, perfectly identical, replies, "Let me in." After that, static. Some locals say it wasn't the first time something like that happened out there. Old loggers told stories of skin mimics, forest entities that learn a voice, then wear the person's likeness once they've heard it enough times. One folklorist from Montpelier, Dr. Ellen Granger, later described it as a regional variant of a mimicry myth found in northern native legends. Spirits that borrow faces to lure the living into the woods. But not everyone bought into folklore. Sheriff Lawson, the man who first entered the cabin, believed it was something else, something human. He suspected an intruder, maybe even a copycat crime made to look supernatural. That theory didn't last long. 3 weeks after the investigation was closed, Lawson went missing. His cruiser was found parked on the same trail leading to the Myers cabin. Engine still running, driver's door wide open. Inside, his radio was on, transmitting dead air. For a few seconds, dispatch recorded a voice, calm, steady, and unmistakably his. "I think I see him." But when backup arrived, there was no one there. And according to his wife, when they played back the audio at home, she swore the second voice in the transmission wasn't Harold Lawson. It was Floyd. What makes the Floyd Myers case so disturbing isn't just what was found inside that cabin. It's how similar stories stretch back centuries, far beyond Vermont. In native Abenaki and Algonquian traditions, there are tales of the Wabanaki mimic, a forest spirit said to echo a person's voice until it learns the shape of their face. Early trappers in the 1800s described hearing themselves being called from the tree line, sometimes by name. They called it the borrower. Anthropologists argue those myths were warnings, stories to keep hunters from wandering too deep into the woods at night. But there's a scientific angle, too. In forensic psychology, a phenomenon known as auditory autophony can cause isolated individuals to hear distorted reflections of their own voice, often described as coming from outside their body. Pair that with sleep deprivation, isolation, and the extreme silence of rural winter, and you get conditions that can convince the mind it's hearing itself call back. Still, that doesn't explain the physical evidence. The mirrors, for instance, appear deliberate. Some experts suggest they were part of an old protective ritual. Mirrors facing the door were meant to reflect evil back upon itself. Others think Floyd was simply trying to watch every angle at once, in case it came again. But there's one more piece of history that ties it all together. In 1973, almost 20 years before Floyd vanished, a forestry team documented a similar disappearance near Somerset, Vermont. Same conditions, same mirror placement, and a final journal entry that read, "If it looks like me, don't open the door." It's never been proven the two cases are connected, but it's hard not to see the pattern. After the investigation was officially closed, the Myers cabin was sealed and left to rot. The county posted a no trespassing notice, but within a year, the sign had vanished, just like most of the case files. Locals say the cabin still stands, half swallowed by trees and snow, its roof caved in from years of frost. A few hikers who've stumbled across it describe the same thing. Mirrors still hanging crooked on the walls, and a faint smell of kerosene that never seems to fade. No one ever found Floyd's body. No one ever found Sheriff Lawson's either. But what unsettles people most are the reports that keep coming in. Campers hearing their names whispered at night, sometimes in a voice they swear sounds exactly like their own. In 2012, a pair of snowmobilers stopped near the old trail entrance to rest. One of them, a man from Massachusetts, later told police he saw a light flicker deep between the trees, like an oil lamp swaying in the dark. When he called out, the voice that answered used his name. He said it was calm, familiar, and it came from just behind him. When he turned, there was no one there, only the faint sound of static drifting from somewhere in the woods. To this day, the Myers property remains unclaimed. The last known photo of the cabin, taken by a surveyor in 2016, shows what looks like a figure standing in the window. The photo was taken at noon, under full sunlight, but the face in the glass looked exactly like Floyd Roger Myers Jr. And behind him, if you brighten the image, there's a second shape, watching. I've covered a lot of strange disappearances, but this one, the Myers case, feels different. Not because of the missing people or the strange mimicry stories, but because of the silence that followed. It's like the whole town agreed to forget, to bury it, along with whatever came out of that cabin. But stories like these, they never really die, do they? They just wait, waiting for someone to mention the name again, waiting for someone curious enough to walk the trail after dark. Maybe Floyd wasn't the first, maybe he wasn't the last, and maybe, just maybe, what wore his face isn't bound to that cabin anymore. Maybe it learned how to follow. Because if the old-timers are right, if it can take your shape, your voice, your memories, then you'd never know if it was already standing behind you. Vermont locals say when you walk past the Myers Trail after sundown, don't stop when you hear your name. Don't answer it, because whatever's calling you out there might sound just like you. This was the forgotten cabin case of Floyd Roger Myers Jr. and the thing that wore his face. I'm Roger Myers, and this is MindFuel.